This is the wrong place for you. Yoga classes aren't held here. The instructor chuckled upon seeing Claire enter the training hall wearing a weathered sweatshirt and carrying a beat-up cloth bag. Another student with advanced ranking added mockingly, "Allow her to attempt it. Entertainment would be welcome." The class members applauded enthusiastically, anticipating a spectacle. Claire requested simply, "One technique. I only want to attempt a single technique." Moments afterward, the advanced student collapsed to the ground with blood streaming from his nose, and the training hall became completely quiet. The events that had just transpired confused everyone present. Claire remained standing, her gentle brunette locks draped loosely across her shoulders, her features free of cosmetics, her gaze unwavering. She showed no expression of satisfaction, displayed no reaction, and didn't even glance toward the fallen man. The scene appeared suspended in time as though someone had frozen a film frame. The instructor, a lean man sporting a military-style haircut and a smirk that lingered, gazed at her as if she had suddenly sprouted wings. The class members, clutching their practice equipment, ceased their murmuring. Claire's cloth bag rested near the mat's border, its handles showing signs of wear, appearing as though it had survived countless battles. No one approached to assist the fallen student. Complete silence prevailed. A woman dressed in an elegant black athletic outfit, sporting crimson nail polish, advanced forward, her tone dripping with mockery. "Impressive display. Where did you acquire that skill? Some questionable street defense course?" She angled her head, her jewelry catching the overhead fluorescent illumination. The remaining students snickered, encouraged by her boldness. Claire's grip momentarily tightened on her bag's strap, yet her expression remained calm. She regarded the woman not with rage, but with a calm intensity that created a palpable tension. "My training came from somewhere specific. You couldn't survive there a single day," she stated, her tone level as though presenting an undeniable fact. The woman's confident expression wavered, and she retreated slightly, her manicured fingers drumming anxiously against her forearm. She modified her position with a subtle weight redistribution, and the space seemed to contract around her. The instructor, whose identification badge displayed Mike, attempted to reassert authority by clearing his throat. "Fine, that was noteworthy. However, you cannot simply enter our facility and begin attacking people." His tone carried an undertone suggesting wounded pride he refused to acknowledge. Several students indicated agreement, their self-assurance gradually returning. One particular student, a man sporting a top-knot hairstyle and pristine training uniform, scoffed. "What's the explanation for your appearance? You seem dressed for janitorial work." The others responded with laughter, though it sounded forced, as though they were gauging the atmosphere. Claire offered no immediate response. She crouched down, retrieved her bag, and positioned it across her shoulder. Her actions were measured and intentional, as though she was calculating each movement carefully. "Attacking wasn't my intention," she said, her tone quiet yet distinct, resembling a casual conversation. "I simply needed to verify if my abilities remained intact." The top-knot-wearing student displayed skepticism with an eye roll, but the instructor's demeanor shifted as though he detected something meaningful in her statement. He moved nearer, positioning his hands at his waist. "Retained what abilities? Do you consider yourself a professional?" The room's energy intensified once more. The students pressed forward, prepared for whatever would follow. Before continuing, "Everyone, I need a brief moment. If this narrative resonates with you, perhaps you've experienced judgment, ridicule, or been forced to endure mistreatment silently. Would you help me? Take out your device, press the approval button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and follow the channel. Your support is invaluable for continuing to share narratives like Claire's, stories that remind us of our true nature. Now, let's proceed." The advanced student lying on the ground, Jason, released a pained sound and shifted onto his side, one palm covering his nose. Blood seeped between his fingers, marking the mat. A few students finally approached, though they moved hesitantly as if frightened to get too near. Jason was imposing, exceeding 6 feet in height, with muscular arms developed through years of mixed martial arts practice. He had been the training hall's star pupil, the one who boasted about his amateur competitions and his perfect record. Now he was simply someone struggling to manage his own bleeding. Pure luck on her part, he mumbled, his speech impaired. That was an underhanded move. A young female student with orthodontic braces and a tendency toward nervous giggling came forward, her mobile device already recording. "This is incredible, it's going to spread online," she announced, laughing as she focused on Jason's bloodied face. "Your fame will come for all the incorrect reasons." The other students joined in the laughter, but it was cruel-spirited, as though they were attacking simply because the opportunity presented itself. Claire's attention shifted to the young woman, and briefly, her fingers hesitated at her bag's closure. "Lower your device," she instructed, her voice gentle yet cutting like a concealed blade. The young woman froze, her giggling ceasing abruptly, and gradually lowered her phone, her face colored with shame. Claire didn't acknowledge Jason. She was already advancing toward the mat's center, her footwear making faint sounds against the polished surface. The instructor, Mike, raised his palm. "Wait. Just hold on. You're not authorized. Nobody granted you permission to engage in combat. Who are you exactly?" His manner was pointed now, as though he was attempting to preserve his dignity before his students. A woman positioned in the rear with blonde streaks and a sleek ponytail folded her arms. "Exactly. What's your situation? You don't simply enter a training facility and start injuring people." Her voice was entirely confrontational, as though she was performing for an audience. The atmosphere in the training hall intensified as a man in formal business attire, clearly not a participant, reclined against the wall, observing Claire with a contemptuous expression. He was the type of individual who conducted himself as though he possessed the establishment, likely a financial backer or a local influential figure who enjoyed asserting his dominance. "This is amusing," he declared loud enough for all to hear. "But in all seriousness, young lady, you're completely outmatched. Why don't you return to wherever you acquired that second-hand sweatshirt?" His laughter was resonant and scornful, and several students participated, glancing at Claire's worn clothing. She provided no response, but her fingers grazed her bag's edge where a faint mark crossed her knuckles, barely detectable but suddenly prominent. "My presence is established now," she stated, her voice calm yet firm, as though she was securing herself to the earth. The man's expression faded, and he adjusted his position uncomfortably, as though he had anticipated her to break down. Claire positioned her bag down once more, this time with greater consideration, as though it contained something delicate. She straightened her posture and arted the woman, her eyes serene yet penetrating. "Breaking things isn't my purpose," she said. "My request was for a single technique." The woman expressed disbelief, but her arms lowered somewhat, as though she was uncertain how to proceed. Mike, the instructor, persisted. "You've come to the incorrect location, miss. This establishment isn't for violent street altercations. We maintain regulations here." He indicated a wall-mounted sign. "Respect, discipline, self-control." One of the senior students, a man with a graying facial beard and advanced ranking, concentrated his attention and leaned in. "Hold on," he said, almost speaking to himself. "That's a defensive position. Traditional form. That technique isn't commonly taught anymore." His voice contained a trace of wonder, as though he had witnessed something extraordinary. Mike turned toward him, his expression puzzled. "What's your meaning, Tom?" The senior student, Tom, continued observing Claire. "That position, it's from an earlier era, predating contemporary mixed martial arts. My instructor employed it during the 1990s, but he claimed it was already considered outdated at that time." Claire's mouth twitched slightly, almost a smile. Someone who's no longer here taught it to me, she said. Her voice was gentle, yet it resonated, as though she was addressing everyone and no one simultaneously. The atmosphere shifted once more, as though the air had become denser. Mike's puzzled look intensified. Who provided your training? Where do you practice? He was attempting to sound authoritative, but there was a fracture in his confidence, as though he wasn't certain he desired the answer. A woman of middle years, her training uniform slightly restrictive, forced her way through the gathering, her face reddened with offense. You believe you can simply enter here and display your skills? She snapped, her voice sufficiently loud to reverberate off the surfaces. This is a legitimate establishment, not some platform for your performance. She motioned toward Claire's worn athletic pants, her nose crinkling as though she had detected an unpleasant odor. Observe yourself. You don't have any place here. Claire's hand paused at her bag, and briefly her shoulders became rigid, as though she was bearing something more substantial than canvas. Belonging isn't determined by your clothing, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it silenced the woman immediately. The space felt more confined, as though Claire's words had eliminated the excess room. Jason was standing again now, a cloth pressed against his nose. His eyes were reddened, and his pride was clearly damaged more severely than his face. Don't be concerned, he announced, his voice sufficiently loud to penetrate the tension. I'll exercise restraint this time. Must preserve her well-being. He cracked his knuckles in an exaggerated display for the observers. The students responded with laughter once more, but it was artificial, as though they were attempting to convince themselves this remained humorous. Jason stepped onto the mat, dominating Claire physically. He displayed a confident expression, though it didn't extend to his eyes. Are you certain you don't require protective coverage, miss? Claire didn't even blink. She simply inclined her head minimally, a motion so subtle it was nearly imperceptible. You should use protective mouth equipment, she said. Her voice was composed, as though she was reminding him about basic preparation. The students snickered, assuming she was out of her element. Jason responded with an exaggerated laugh and extended his arms broadly. Very well. Let's conclude this rapidly. I'll permit you to make contact, then I'll overpower you. He gestured to the observers and several people applauded, encouraging his behavior. What occurred next concluded in half a second. Jason elevated his hand, perhaps to grasp her, perhaps to force her backward. Claire didn't hesitate. She advanced, eliminating the distance so rapidly it appeared she had instantaneously relocated. Her elbow struck upward, connecting precisely with his nose. The identical location as previously. The sound of impact was pronounced, resembling a branch fracturing. Jason struck the mat forcefully, blood flowing down his face once again. This time, he didn't rise. The room was absolutely silent. Nobody shifted. Nobody drew breath. A young woman positioned in the rear with an elevated hairstyle and a nervous tendency of biting her thumbnail spoke haltingly. That was a proximity combat damage technique. Her voice trembled as though she couldn't accept she had verbalized it. Mike spun around, his face drained of color. What did you just express? The young woman retreated but persisted. It's a military technique. I've studied about it. You target the shock location. It's not something taught in a training hall. Her statement lingered there, and the room began to generate noise once more, but this time it was altered. Less scornful, more disturbed. A senior man advanced, his uniform pristine, his advanced ranking worn and diminished. He was the head instructor, the one who had been observing silently from the periphery. His identity was Sensei Harata, and his expression was stern, as though he had witnessed experiences he didn't discuss. That technique, he stated, his voice subdued and controlled, is prohibited in competition. It's excessively hazardous. He regarded Claire not with anger, but as though he was attempting to decipher a mystery. Who are you to employ that technique? Another instructor, a solidly built man with a writing pad, contributed. We don't permit violence beyond the regulations here. You cannot sims. Claire interrupted him, not by elevating her voice, but by speaking so distinctly it halted the room. Winning isn't why I engage in combat, she stated. Survival is why I fight. Her statement landed with force, and briefly, nobody possessed a response. The young woman with the elevated hairstyle whispered to her neighbor, Is she from the military? The inquiry remained unanswered, but it transformed the atmosphere. People began regarding Claire with altered perception, as though they were perceiving her genuinely for the first time. A young man with a military-style haircut and an arrogant expression pushed forward, his uniform unsecured as though he disregarded the regulations. You're merely displaying your abilities, he declared, his voice boisterous and bold. What? You believe you're superior to us? Because you achieved a fortunate strike. He advanced nearer, excessively near, his breath heated with rage. This isn't your recreational area. Claire's eyes connected with his, and briefly, her hand reacted as though she was prepared to respond, but she refrained. Instead, she angled her head sufficiently to make him feel diminished. Recreation isn't my purpose, she stated, her voice so subdued it was nearly a whisper, yet it caused him to retreat, his confidence dissolving like fragile leaves. Mike, still gripping his writing pad like protective equipment, moved nearer. We require your identification, he stated, his voice constricted. You cannot simply enter here, do that, and anticipate us to overlook it. Sensei Hirata indicated agreement, but his eyes were gentler now, as though he was beginning to comprehend something. Claire didn't argue. She accessed her bag, extracted a worn leather holder, and provided a card. Mike accepted it, his hands trembling slightly. He examined it, then transferred it to Hirata. The elderly master's eyes expanded momenta, wryly before he returned it. One of the instructors, a younger man with a military-style haircut and a portable computer, was already entering information. Wait a moment, he stated, his voice pressing. I've discovered something. He rotated the display toward Hirata, and the elderly man leaned forward. The room was so quiet you could perceive the computer fan's hum. Claire Evans, the instructor read audibly. Ghost Viper Program 2016. Single trainee survived the actual combat phase. He paused, his voice diminishing. She disappeared from documentation in 2020. Annotation states, no public interaction. A murmur traveled through the room. A martial arts academic, a slender woman wearing eyeglasses who had been monitoring from the rear, stepped forward. Ghost Viper, she stated, almost speaking to herself. That means she's a living myth. Her voice was hushed, as though she was frightened to verbalize it excessively loud. Hirata bowed toward Claire, a profound, respectful bow, unlike those he extended to his students. We were unaware, he stated. We apologize. The words were straightforward, but they possessed significance, as though he was speaking for everyone present. The atmosphere shifted, but not everyone was prepared to release it. A student, a man with a completely shaved head and a defensive attitude, shouted, Then what's your purpose here? What do you desire? His voice was pointed as though he was attempting to reclaim some authority. The woman with the blonde streaks muttered sufficiently loud for everyone to perceive. Nobody extended an invitation to her. Claire didn't react. She regarded them, her eyes constant, unblinking. I'm simply searching for someone, she stated. Her voice was subdued, but it penetrated the disturbance like a blade. A reserved student who had been positioned in the shadows, his uniform excessively large for his slight build, advanced nervously. You're not supposed to be present here, he stammered, his voice scarcely audible. This is a protected environment. We don't require whatever you represent. His words were awkward, but they caused pain, resembling a youth attempting to sound authoritative but striking a vulnerable point. Claire's jaw constricted momentarily, and she adjusted her bag, her fingers contacting an aged keychain, a miniature metal star, dented and worn. "Protection isn't what you comprehend it to be," she stated, her voice subdued, as though she was speaking from a recollection. The young man retreated, his face reddened, and the room felt more frigid, as though her words had extracted the warmth. Mike, still holding the writing pad, attempted to maintain his authority. "Who?" he inquired, his tone demanding yet unsteady. Claire's hand returned to her bag. She extracted a photograph, creased and diminished as though it had been transported for years. She displayed it sufficiently long for the room to observe. It was a collective image, a special operations team in tactical equipment, expressions serious yet proud. Jason was present in it, younger, more slender, under an alternative identity, his operational designation printed distinctly below. Claire's voice was controlled, almost excessively calm. "You're the individual who compromised the base security at Langley." The room responded with a collective gasp, as though the oxygen had been extracted. A student, a reserved man who had been remaining distant, whispered, "That security breach resulted in 6 fatalities." His voice fractured, as though he was recalling something he had only studied about. Claire indicated acknowledgement with a single nod. "Revenge isn't my purpose for being here," she stated. "I'm here to demonstrate I survived." Her words were gentle, but they struck with force. Jason, still positioned on the ground, didn't shift. His cloth was saturated with blood, and his eyes were expanded, as though he was witnessing his history overtaking him. A woman with a precise geometric haircut and her own writing pad, likely an assistant instructor, advanced, her voice trembling with indignation. "You believe you can simply make accusations against people in that manner?" she stated, indicating the photograph. "You enter here, assault our most skilled combatant, and now you're presenting narratives. That's despicable." The room murmured in concurrence, some students indicating agreement, their expressions rigid. Claire didn't regard her. She folded the photograph with care, returning it to her bag, her movement gradual, as though she was managing something sacred. "It's not a narrative," she stated, her voice controlled yet substantial, as though it bore the burden of years. The woman's mouth opened, then closed, her writing pad lowering as the room's rage wavered. The training hall administrator, an anxious man with diminishing hair, advanced, his hands trembling. "We don't permit individuals like you here," he stated, his voice boisterous yet unstable. He grasped a writing pad and eliminated Claire's identity from the registration listing, as though that would erase what had just transpired. A law enforcement officer in preparation who had been observing from the periphery positioned his hand on his firearm, not extracting it, but ensuring everyone observed. The room was tense, as though it was about to fracture. Claire didn't respond. She simply regarded them, her expression serene, her bag returned to her shoulder. Then she pivoted and advanced toward the entrance. As Claire approached the entrance, a man in his 5th decade with a weathered appearance and an uneven gait pushed off the wall where he had been reclining. "You represent difficulties," he stated, his voice rough, as though he had consumed excessive tobacco. "Individuals like you introduce disorder wherever you travel." He indicated her bag, his finger tree, embling slightly. "What additional items do you possess in there? An explosive device?" The accusation was ridiculous, but it impacted forcefully, the room's tension intensifying. Claire halted, her hand at the doorframe, and pivoted sufficiently to connect with his eyes. "Only recollections," she stated, her voice so subdued it was nearly lost in the climate control system's hum. The man's finger descended and he looked elsewhere, as though he had perceived something in her eyes he couldn't manage. The students separated as she progressed, as though they were frightened to obstruct her path. The atmosphere outside was frigid, the illumination from streetlights projecting extended shadows on the pavement. Claire stepped into the obscurity, her footwear quiet against the surface. Behind her, the training hall was silent, except for the faint sound of Jason's strained breathing. Nobody assisted him upward. Nobody verbalized anything. The burden of what had occurred settled over the room like particles. Then a voice fractured the silence. A female student, diminutive with abbreviated hair and a medical professional's identification on her uniform, rushed to the entrance. "Wait!" she called out. Claire halted, her back still toward the training hall, her silhouette framed by the streetlight. The young woman's voice was unsteady yet distinct. "I served as a medical professional at Langley," she stated. "You rescued me from the private military contractor soldiers. You rescued 12 lives that day." Her words trembled, as though she had been retaining them for years. "They lost recollection, but I didn't." Claire didn't pivot around. She remained there, her shoulder motionless, her bag suspended low. The young woman's voice became gentler. "You're the explanation we're still existing." The words suspended in the atmosphere, substantial and genuine. Inside the training hall, the students were subdued, their heads inclined, as though they were finally comprehending. Jason remained on the ground, his face drained of color, his history exposed. The administrator looked elsewhere, his writing pad forgotten. The law enforcement officer's hand descended from his firearm. A faint sound emerged from Claire's bag as she stood in the entrance, a gentle jingling resembling metal against metal. The medical professional's eyes detected it, and her breath caught. It was a military identification tag, partially concealed in a lateral compartment, reflecting faintly under the streetlight. Nobody else noticed, but the medical professional's hands trembled as she clasped them together, as though she was praying. "You transported them all," she whispered, her voice fragmenting. "You transported their identities." Claire's head angled slightly, not precisely an acknowledgement, but sufficiently to recognize the truth. The space felt more confined, as though the burden of those identities occupied every corner. Days afterward, the repercussions began to emerge. Jason was terminated from the training hall, his identity eliminated from the membership list. A local news organization acquired the narrative, not about Claire, but about the man who had betrayed his team. His financial supporters abandoned him. His social media profiles went inactive, and his former mixed martial arts companions ceased responding to his communications. The blonde woman with the streaks attempted to publish a sarcastic statement online, but it produced negative results. Her followers opposed her, condemning her for attacking someone who didn't warrant it. The training hall itself experienced negative impact. Students ceased attending, and the administrator's nervous apologies provided no assistance. The adolescent young woman who had attempted to record Jason's lapsed deleted her recording that evening, her hands trembling as she performed it. She published an apology online instead, acknowledging she had been swept up in the situation, ridiculing someone she didn't comprehend. It received some approval, but primarily people progressed forward. The man in the formal business attire, the financial backer, ceased attending the training hall. Information circulated that he had lost a significant business arrangement when his company's leadership became aware of his conduct. Nobody verbalized it explicitly, but the connection was evident. His words to Claire had cost him more than he had anticipated. Claire didn't remain to observe it develop. She was already departed, progressing through the world as she always had, subdued, undetected, transporting her truth in her movements. Her spouse arrived the subsequent day, a man with substantial shoulders and an expression that didn't require verbalization. He entered the training hall and the room transformed. Nobody stated his identity, but they understood. The administrator stammered. The instructor looked elsewhere, and the students repositioned their feet. Claire stood adjacent to him, not depending on him, not requiring to. Her presence was adequate. The medical professional, the one who had verbalized, observed from the rear. Her eyes were moist, but she didn't weep. She simply indicated acknowledgement, as though she was expressing gratitude one final time. Claire's spouse positioned a hand on her shoulder. A minimal gesture, but it communicated everything. They departed together into the evening illumination, leaving the training hall behind. The silence they departed was more pronounced than any words. As they stepped onto the street, a young male child no older than 10 years, who had been observing from the training hall's opening, rushed out after them. He grasped a crumpled sheet of material, a sketch of a woman in a sweatshirt standing elevated on a mat. "This represents you," he stated, forcing it into Claire's hands, his voice diminutive yet intense. "I observed what you performed. You're similar to a superhero." Claire examined the sketch, her fingers following the unsteady lines, and for the first time her mouth curved into something approaching a smile. She returned it gently and stated, "Retain it. Sketch your own hero eventually." The young male beamed, grasping the material like a treasure as she departed. Nobody lost recollection of that day. Nobody lost recollection of her. Claire Evans, the woman who went tarred with a diminished sweatshirt and a frayed bag, who maintained her position without elevating her voice, who transported her marks as though they were honors. She didn't require to prove anything. The proof existed in the manner the room transformed, the manner the truth emerged, the manner the world shifted slightly because she had been present. Sometimes you don't require to vocalize loudly to be perceived. Sometimes you simply require to maintain your position. Allow the world to overtake you. Allow the truth to perform the communication. And when it performs, it's more pronounced than anything. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.